For me, I think like you have to have a vision, you have to have like a gut feel of something that works.
What is up, everybody? And hello from planet Earth. I'm your host, Philip. Most of you'll know me as Phil, and this is the Future Minds podcast. Simply the best podcast out there, covering all you need to know in edtech, online learning, the digital economy, and what's being done around the world to shape the minds of the future. In today's episode, I'll be speaking with Mike Sharman. Mike Sharman is the owner of Retroviral Digital, an online communications consultancy that specializes in communication strategy, social media, and content creation. You'll have seen his work for the likes of Creepy Crawly, Rockomamas, Russell Hobbs, Martin & Martin brands, Mnet, and a whole range of other top-tier companies. Mike was named one of Mail & Guardian's top 200 young South Africans in 2013, and he's the co-founder of the hit influencer marketing platform Webfluential, the renowned digital marketing agency Retroactive, as well as a disruptive sports storytelling agency and athlete management ecosystem called MatchKit, which he co-founded alongside Brian Habana. In this episode, Mark and I discuss his entrepreneurial origin story, the value of storytelling in business, the relationship between education and success, how the digital landscape is changing during COVID, and a range of other topics. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation with Mike, and I'm sure you will too. Without further ado, I bring you Mike Sharman. Thank you for joining me. I appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, great. So you're joining from Joburg, is that correct?
That's it. The bustling metropolis, all happening. It's boiling outside.
Yeah,
Summer is here.
I'm from Pretoria originally, and I must say I wouldn't go back for anything. But there's something about the hustle and bustle in Joburg that attracts all the entrepreneurs, hey?
That's it. It also gives you crow's feet. And,
yeah. Crow's feet from all the stress, I suppose. No. Okay, great. So to start off, maybe you can just tell those who don't know who you are a little bit about yourself and what it is you do.
I'm a storyteller. So I have a digital agency called Retroviral, and we've made more brands go viral globally than any other agency in Africa. We've worked with the brands such as Nando's, Rockomamas. Most recently, you may have seen our work with Creepy Crawly. We created a parody for my octopus teacher called My Creepy Teacher, which went absolutely mental and took over the digital world. We do a lot of work with Gumtree. So we like to work with challenger brands. We like to have fun. So that's my kind of core project, Retroviral. And then I'm involved in a sports sister agency to Retroviral called Retroactive, with Brian Habana and Ben Kopinski as our partners. And then most recently in lockdown, we launched a tech product called matchkit.co to help athletes better commercialize their careers. And I think it was a perfect time to do such a thing, considering so many of them had their sports decimated by COVID-19 restrictions. So yeah, that's a little bit of background on me, really, just in a nutshell.
Great. We had Glenn on the podcast for one of the earlier episodes just after My Creepy Teacher launched, and what a great little viral video you guys put together. How did that come about, just out of interest?
Yeah, so I think it has been quite a full-on year for so many of us, and me being interested by the arts and cinematography and all that kind of thing. I was watching My Octopus Teacher at home with the family, and I was like, this so schwau about it. I was so Cape Townian about it. Like, look at this beautiful story. And my wife was quite a lot more cynical. She's like, can you imagine if you neglected your family and you went and started hanging out with an octopus? Like, I'd be pretty bummed out about that. And it started getting the cogs turning. We actually worked with Glenn on a project 7 years ago, a project called Creepy Crawly Wrangler. He and Jason Goliath were kind of upcoming stars, and they were starting to break out of the comedy scene. So Jason was our ode to almost the South African version of the crocodile hunter, who was the Creepy Crawly Wrangler. And he would go around and jump into people's homes and basically fish out and wrangle their creepies. And Glenn was his sidekick called Barry. And it's a beautiful piece. I'll send you a link after this. And yeah, we'd obviously worked with Creepy Crawly all those years ago, and that attracted like more than 100,000 views organically, and that was like this huge deal. And yeah, it started me thinking like they would be the perfect brand to be able to create this kind of spoof or parody content of. And spoke to Glenn because we'd worked together on some project recently. And off the back of that, we were bouncing script ideas. Glenn had written some words. I'd tweaked it a bit. Then he was sending me voice notes of, it's just so magical, or, like basically doing his best Craig Foster. And it had me in tears. And I was like, if this is moving me so dramatically just via WhatsApp, can you imagine how amazing it would be if we turn this into video? And we got the client to approve. They didn't really know much about the Octopus Teacher, so we pitched the trailer and showed some of the materials that we wanted to put together. And then, yeah, Glenn found the perfect home to shoot it in Cape Town, and he worked with his team from Panther Punch, and boom, within like 96 hours from starting to talk about it to actually be live, and then it just became like a runaway train of virality.
Brilliant. I mean, it was classic, and everybody was obviously talking about it, and it's actually so cool that you could blend real comedy with a commercial objective in the end of the day. So, I think that's takes quite a bit of talent. So coming back just a step, tell us a little bit about your education. What led you to start Retroactive, start Retroviral? Did you take it through traditional sort of corporate career path before venturing into the entrepreneurial space, or has this always been in your blood?
For me, I've always struggled to try and find what I'm going to be when I'm big. And when I was at school, a really good guidance teacher at the time, life orientation now, she suggested that because I was good at art, because I was good at humanities and languages, that I should consider a BA marketing comms degree. I had considered maybe I should be a lawyer. Like, there was something that I've always really liked language, and I've always really liked debating and public speaking and performance. Actually, I wanted to be an actor as one of the other thoughts that I had. And my folks were like, why do you want to be an actor? There's no money in that. You'll never be able to have medical aid. You'll never be able to pay a bond, like first world problems. For me, so I decided to do the BA marketing comms degree as like a safety and as a backup. And what was cool about it, like in the first year, we had some mix of minors. So there was politics and there was audio visual. So I was exposed to a whole bunch of different stuff. And in between that, I had marketing subject and business management subject. So I was given a real high level exposure to a mixture of art and creativity. Once I finished my degree, I said, cool, I'm going to go overseas. Like, I used to work throughout varsity. I used to be a telemarketer, and I used to work in promotions. I used to do anything I could to hustle and make some cash to supplement my lifestyle, pay my fuel, all of that good stuff that you need as a student. And then I also was fortunate growing up. I was an airline brat. So my dad flew for SAA. He started out as an apprentice there in the workshop, worked his way up to being a pilot. So I've always been exposed to like people with tenacity and hustle, and people that haven't come from much but have just made their own kind of destiny. And my aunt and uncle lived in the States from the 80s. And during my varsity holidays, or even from my high school holidays, I used to go over for a month to 3 months at a time, depending on when school holidays and university holidays were. And both of my aunt and my uncle were entrepreneurs. So my aunt started a railroad sleeper furniture business in the US. And my uncle, he bought home-built airplanes or kit builds that guys had started but had never finished. And then he'd either build those planes or he would sell them to South Africa, Australia, different markets around the world where people were interested in hobbies of building airplanes and flying home builds or kit builds. And there was a whole like exposure of different people that had an entrepreneurial kind of thought to them. My sister, she started her own business. So there was like, there's been a whole bunch of hustle in the DNA, I think. And after varsity, I went to the States. I said, cool, I found a place to go and study some acting. So I found a college in the Valley in Hollywood, and moved there for 6 months and started learning how to write stand-up comedy. So all around the science of it, and developing like a premise or an act out, the truth in an observational kind of comedy setting. So if you think about someone like Jerry Seinfeld or Trevor Noah, the reason why they're so funny is because they observe and they comment first around the factual thing. and then they make the act out the funny part of the humor. And that was what I learned to write. Then I wrote a play. I sat at Starbucks and wrote a play about being the light lamaki in a family of two older sisters, and a dad who was never around because he was flying around the world, and a dominant mother. So I had a lot of material just in terms of writing an 80-minute play, and came back to South Africa, and that became my first startup. Like, that was producing, it was developing sets, and it was looking at budgets and all that kind of thing, and ran it at Wits, and then all the profits then were injected back into taking the play to Grahamstown to the Fringe Festival. And the Fringe was it was a really eye-opening experience. Like, it was having to go out and, absolutely shamelessly go up to people and say, here's my play, here's my poster, don't you want to come and check it out? And that, coupled with all the telemarketing and promotions that I did at university, it really teaches you to have a thick skin and not to be shy, to actually go and sell your wares to people. And after the play, I felt a little bit disillusioned because I was like, this acting thing is actually really hard. And friends of mine had started a PR agency. You may know them. Nikki is actually the person in question. And Nikki and I were at school together. Her mom was my English teacher, Nikki from Tribeca. And they just started Tribeca. And they asked if I wanted to come and work in PR. So I was like, I didn't really know much about PR. I'd maybe spent a semester on it at varsity. And it was one of the best grounding experiences working for them. I was employee number 2, so proper startup environment, good communication, good strategic thinking. We worked on the launch of the Virgin Money credit card, so I was exposed to like financial services and some tech products and some other peer-to-peer fintech solves that were quite new to market. And for me, it was a great experience to learn how to craft and construct a story for the brands that you represent, and put together stats and research and insight to make journalists excited about your story, that it wasn't an advertorial, but it actually had meat and it had insights for their readers. And then I won a fancy dress competition to go to London, as you do. And I was a super fan, a fanatical fan with Castle Lager, went off to Lord's in 2008 and ended up staying in the UK for 2 years. I'd never used my working holiday visa, so I kind of unlocked that. And I got a job working in PR after a whole bunch of other work and spit bries and a whole bunch of stuff to try and, get into the UK market. And PR was the thing that I had experience with, so I leaned into that, and I started working for an agency in the center of London, where they PR'd startups, and it gave me a whole bunch of exposure and experience to brands that were unknown, and how do you get journalists interested in their stories. And it's fascinating because I guess it also taught me in the long run how I would need to be able to PR and use my own PR skills to ultimately PR my own startups in the future. And I think for me, PR is one of the most valuable tools in your arsenal of being able to start a startup and then tell the world about it, because that's what you need. Word of mouth spread is probably one of the most important and most peer-to-peer validated tactics that you have the ability to roll with when you start a business. And in 2009, I started, scribbling down some ideas. I'd been on Twitter for a year at that time. I saw the growth of social media. I saw the impending rise of data acceptance and adoption in South Africa, with the rise of CCOM being launched. And I, in 2010, came back for the Football World Cup and launched Retroviral in that June of 2010. And I had this view that I was going to give myself 3 months, and if it didn't work out, then I'd go and get a job. And fortunately landed my first retainer with Ogilvy on Miller Rock the Boat social media management within the first 2 months. And at the time, it was a 10 grand a month retainer. That's all I really needed, just to make sure that I had a bit of comfort and security, and could pay my rent and have a bit of food, and my fuel wasn't too expensive. So it really gave me that initial step to know, this is cool, I'm onto something here. And then the biggest coup of 2010 was being awarded the Nando's account with Black River. So Black River was the advertising agency, and then our suggestion to Nando's was to post their posters not on newspapers, but rather online, and use influencers before influencer marketing was a thing. So we've been working with bloggers and celebrities and well-followed individuals on Twitter and Facebook as our distribution points and our dissemination targets. And that was kind of our hyper focus. Our hyper focus was just to amplify content before you could buy your own ads on Facebook, before you could buy your own YouTube pre-rolls. And because of all that PR background, it was like the perfect crescendo of like where I wanted to be. It was that mix of storytelling and making stuff go viral. And that December we resulted in a Nando's campaign that got 100,000 views organically. A year later, we were working on the Last Dictator Standing campaign that got like 2 million views in 6 days. We won a bronze award at Cannes shortly thereafter. And all these things that I was never exposed to because I was never a traditional ad guy resulted in, getting some exposure and people starting to hear about the work we were doing. And we just focused on that hyper niche and just hyper focus of amplification. And by the time 2015, 2016 rolled in, we ended up like expanding and flexing our creative muscles, and we won the Rockamama's and the Russell Hobbs account. And on those accounts, we were the full lead agency, the creative lead. We were doing TV commercials, outdoor, billboards, digital, etc. And here we are in 2020, where we fortunately have built a boutique agency of really good people, a nimble mix of a great creative director. Shout out to you, Kath, and our community managers and a finance team and an account management team. And we do really good bread and butter social media, but then we also excel at coming up with ideas that have the ability to go viral, whether they are activations, digital, or PR. And those three things are my what I call the holy trinity of marketing, because if you really want to move people, you have to have both a physical and a digital component. The more digital savvy we become, the more we crave human interaction. So that's just kind of a real nutshell of the last 10 years. And then 2.5 years ago, Brian Abana was retiring from his rugby career. We'd been friends since school days, and we spoke backwards and forwards about starting like a sports business. And what resulted was Retroactive, which is effectively a sister agency to Retroviral. And in lockdown, we spotted an opportunity to help athletes better commercialize their careers. So we went full tech play and said, let's build a product where athletes can effectively create a website in minutes. They can sell merch, and they can also showcase their stats of their audiences and their demographics so that they are more attractive to brands, and that they can raise funds for a charity of their choice, whether it's their own, like Brian has, or if it's even the SPCA or an orphanage or whatever it may be. So MatchKit launched in June, and that's been our current baby that we've been trying to get off the ground. So my year has been quite insane, to put it lightly.
No, incredible. That sounds exactly like what a sort of classic entrepreneurial journey sounds like. The last 20 years sounds like it's been a great ride for you. Something that stood out to me there, sort of a common thread in all that what you were saying, is that thing of storytelling. So storytelling is something that you often hear people either as media experts or entrepreneurs talking about. Storytelling as an essential component to being able to either build a business, convince people of a sales pitch, or even build a team. I recently started reading a book called Storytelling. I believe it's by Matthew Dixon, Dan Kennedy. These are guys that competed at the highest level in the Moth competition. I believe that's one of these sort of global storytelling competitions. And this book actually came recommended by an entrepreneur who I follow, and as one of the most recommended books around. And all it is the ability to tell a story. So from your perspective, how important is storytelling, the ability to tell a story, and how have you used that skill to build your business and to further yourself in life?
Storytelling for me is the most incredible aspect. And I think that entrepreneurs are always told, like, don't become key man dependent, because then you aren't attractive to potential acquirers or investors. But for me, I believe in the opposite of that. I believe that humans are connected to other humans first and foremost before they are to an unknown brand or a logo. So if you build your story around yourself, that naturally becomes a component of your business. I mean, if you think about some of the best tech businesses in the world, like Zuckerberg and Facebook are inextricably linked, Dorsey and Twitter. If we look at Schmidt and Google, like a lot of those stories all started out with the jockey, and ultimately it's the person that the investors invest in. It's the person that the audience or the customer invests in, because I'm the one that has to sell with my partners. So if we tell our stories first and we build our own narrative, like that becomes inextricably inextricably linked to our brand that we are developing. And then sure, the brand takes on its own culture, it has its own people, it has its own elements. But for me, it starts with the founders, and it starts with their ability to have a vision. And the vision isn't to be confused with a business plan. For me, like, I'm anti-business plan. For me, I think like you have to have a vision, you have to have like a gut feel of something that works. And Silicon Valley has made a lot of mistakes in terms of how it sold its own narrative. Like, it sold us the story of you build an audience or you build something that has a ton of followers or a ton of fans or a ton of signups, and then eventually you monetize it after that. But as South African entrepreneurs, like, it's most important to think about something that can generate revenue from within the first few days, because ultimately cash flow is the lifeblood of business. So cash flow is the number one killer of small business. So if you haven't come up with an idea that has the ability to generate revenue in some shape or form, then it just feels to me like it's a waste of time. And that's my view. Like, I'm a focused bootstrap entrepreneur where I don't like to take investment and I don't like to raise capital, because you're already starting day one where you're involving too many other cooks that don't share your vision. So share your vision, build it, and convince a few people to become customers. And that's when you can start learning the most.
Couldn't agree more. So which of these lessons, if you had to look back in your life in the last 10, 20 years, you've got 3 kids, I believe. Which of these lessons do you believe are most important? Imparting knowledge, life lessons, experience, information onto the next generation. What sort of fundamental life philosophies are you imparting onto your kids?
So for me, I'm a huge fan of curiosity, and I think that kids should be encouraged to ask questions and also have the ability to play and experiment. So the more they are encouraged to speak up, to public speak, to get up on stage, to participate in sports, I think that ultimately, like, that's the thing about education. It's like the books are one aspect, the learning is one aspect, but where are those human engagement and interaction skills that will ultimately help your child to become a more rounded individual? So for me, like, the huge benefits that I had when I was at school was like the performance opportunities, the ability to stand up and speak my mind. I also feel like there isn't enough focus at our education level around business. So for me, I've always been afraid of money. And one of the best lessons I had when I first started from Melissa Attry was, don't let the fears of financial failure cripple you, because financial failure really constricts creativity. And, for my kids, I'd love them to come and play around at my business and to be able to see things like, what does a balance sheet look like? Like, words like management accounts and balance sheets are so frightening. And it took me into my 30s to be under a lot of pressure from potential investors at the time to really understand everything from what does margin mean, what is revenue, what is cost of sale, what is OPEX, like all these things that to the average like BCom kid, like that'll make them laugh at me. But I think the reality is like, if we can really understand in the future growth and development about how creativity and analytics can intersect, like that's where you can become a much more rounded individual, both on the business front and just as like a general kind of worker. I think the more we understand these multiple touch points, even if it's at a high level, like those are the most valuable thing. You have to have people skills, but you also need to have a high level degree of number skills.
Yeah, people skills is obviously one of the essentials, and it's something that's just not taught at school in a direct sense. I guess it's something that you suppose kids learn at school through socialization and so on, but it's always interesting to me that something like, psychology, for example, is not taught at school. Being able to think and understand the way that other people around you think is fundamentally incredibly important, and it's just something that is left until university level to even touch.
Critical thinking is a great comment because we've lost the ability to critically analyze things, and I think for kids that study journalism, it's a trait that's remarkable to help you really unpack different complex aspects. And for me, like, the one thing that I'm not obsessed about as an employer is looking at CVs. Like, I'd much rather you make an impact. I mean, the amount of people that have applied to work with me that have come out of a traditional CV or from people that haven't even got degrees. Like, I'm not obsessed about that as a business owner. I'm obsessed with, are you passionate and are you a critical thinker? And I think that's an important caveat for wherever we're going in this discussion.
Yeah. So, I mean, bringing it back to education, in South Africa, if you could having a look at the education system, the system that you went through, your kids are obviously on their education journey, just starting off. If you could change anything about the South African education system or the traditional education system as a whole, what do you think you would change?
I would add a built-in gap year, similar to how the Germans do it. It's effectively government funded, and it almost is like an exchange program. So those things still exist here in terms of a small sector. If you think about Rotary clubs around the world and those sorts of individuals, like they still do those exchange programs, but I'd open that up to a broad base of students. That for a gap year, you have to go and you have to stay in a different community, or you have to go to a neighboring country. And that could be a SADC country, it could be a European country. I mean, the opportunities are endless, because what that does, it creates you as the outsider within a community. For us, we gravitate to spaces that are safe. And if we get the chance to feel like an outsider and we get exposed to new communities, it opens up our minds to a lot more different and liberal approach to how the world can potentially work when you collaborate with others. And I think it's a simple fix that could have a huge impact on so many different individuals and so many communities across our country.
Great. That's an insight that none of our other guests have had. So coming back to your children, if you don't mind telling us a little bit more about the way that you think about their future. 2020 has obviously been a catalyst for so many changes, and the both the education landscape as well as the business landscape has changed significantly. I think a lot of people have also reprioritized multiple aspects of their life as a result of what's happened with the coronavirus. Now, how do you see the next couple of years playing out, and how are you looking to educate your kids as they go through those fundamental years, in their education journey?
Well, I think it's a huge problem that my 2.5-year-old is walking around with a fake cell phone going, I'm on a meeting, I'm in a meeting. So I think they've been exposed to remote working in a completely different sense. But I think in all seriousness, I joke about us both, my wife and I, we have our own businesses, and we say we never want our kids to be entrepreneurs because, we know how much of a slog and hustle is required. But I think that with each of them, the three of them, they're also completely different. Like the one, our little boy, he absorbs information. Like he loves going on game drives, and we were just away this weekend and obsessed about facts about everything from the grass, the trees, the birds, the animals. And then with the little girls, they're also completely different from one another, where the one very compliant, she reminds me of myself when I was a child. I was very good at school and I obeyed all the rules and didn't break any of them. And then the littlest one, that one's just a curly haired menace that has had 3 sets of stitches in the last year and doesn't want to listen to the rules, and it's going to be very naughty. So I think that all three of them are going to need a different requirement when it comes to education and it comes to their preparation for their futures. It's just the most fascinating thing, where you can see your best and your worst characteristics coming out in your progeny, and sometimes you have to do that emoji where you're like, I can't believe that I've passed this terrible gene onto that poor child. But I think that what is great and what they've seen during lockdown is that we can work from home and we can work from anywhere, but we can get our tasks done. It's shown them about discipline and the importance of knuckling down and making solutions when the world is completely turned upside down. And I think what's great about this new world is that there's much more exposure to tech. I mean, we are like digital natives in our businesses, where if we don't know something, we just learn it on YouTube, or we learn it from specific online sites that we find relevant. And I think that that's great for the world ahead, is kids can literally be anything. The one thing that lockdown has also taught me is that you have access to anybody on the planet. I mean, we're all only 2 or 3 degrees of separation from one another based on the Facebook effect. If we look at LinkedIn and how you can post out a request and basically find anyone on the globe that is a right fit for you, I think that our kids are going to be the most connected that they ever have been, and it's up to them about what kind of path they want to determine for themselves, because literally they can open any door if they are resilient and if they are proactive in their approach of what they want to do.
Yeah, and I mean, that is truly a South African trait, is that resilience and resourcefulness. The digital economy is something that's obviously expanded, and 2020 has been a catalyst for people to literally take their businesses online wherever they can. How has 2020 changed your view on both running a business as well as growing the business going forward? Is it something that you think we would revert back to, the traditional in-office space environment, or do you think that remote is the way forward?
I think it's a quasi-remote work office hybrid. For me, I mean, we had pretty flexi hours before lockdown, but what I have realized is that so many of my staff have enjoyed, instead of that 7:30 start, sitting in traffic, the struggles and the hassle that comes with that. They've gone and exercised in the morning, or they've had a run, or they've taken some time out and meditated, whatever that suits their own personalities. And for me, I think it's also shown them that they don't need to be micromanaged at junior level. Like, so many of them have the ability to be quite adult in their execution. I don't like to micromanage people. I don't like to set insane parameters. So I think the one thing that it's taught the workforce that you can collaborate better, but you still need to have human interaction at times, because you miss out on certain things. You can see balls get dropped when there are broken telephone situations just via Skype or Slack or email, however your teams work together. And for me, I like the flexibility of this new world. Like, most pitches and presentations have been done remotely. So if we would have had to fly to Cape Town in the past, I mean, that's like get to the airport 2 hours before, then you have the flight, then you've got to get back in the evening. So you basically spent like 6 hours commuting, when nowadays you can just do it on a Zoom or a Hangout. And it's forced that adoption of people cross country to say, oh, actually, we don't need to do the flight for that board meeting. We don't need to travel around the globe. Like, we can have this from the seat of our homes. And also, I mean, especially for a startup like MatchKit, we've been exposed to multiple international markets. So we've been speaking to people in South America, people in the States, and I've worked and I've gone on roadshows in the States before where, you almost like look down upon being a South African because you're not at the epicenter of the world. You're not from Silicon Valley. Whereas now it's like, it's almost the norm to be able to speak to anybody. As long as you're in their time zone, they're less judgmental and less critical of the fact that you're a Safa or you're based in another part of the world. And we've had like great traction and great movement. I mean, it's taken a lot longer because you've got a lot more process and you've got a lot more procedure and you're talking to people virtually. So there's a little bit more digging that happens. But I think if you can gain trust through these kinds of channels, like, you can have access to anybody of any level anywhere in the world. And that's what I'm excited about, is the access to the C-suite that I've had during this lockdown period.
So what do you believe about the education system that most people may disagree with?
For me, I think that competition is good. So I disagree with the way in which the education system has looked at sport as can be a negative thing, and how like everyone needs to have a turn and everyone needs to be a bowler, everyone needs to be a batsman. Like, I disagree with that, because I think that's not how the world works. And you need to almost teach like survival of the fittest, and you need to teach about the strength in collaboration. So I definitely think that we need to put a lot more emphasis on sport and the integration thereof within the education system. And I also believe that, now with the tech that we have at our disposal, the ability to incorporate AI is like, we can really develop bespoke learning solutions and situations for kids. And I don't think that exams are the be all and end all of life. Like, I really think that so many kids struggle under pressure. Kids are under more and more pressure than ever before. So I do think that we need to relook at the way in which like testing occurs, because there's got to be a better way. This whole old school rote style, it's not cool.
Yeah, I agree. And the way that you leave high school is generally in a confused state more than anything else. If you could go back to in time and give 18-year-olds yourself a little bit of advice, what would that be?
The advice I'd probably give would be more around the fact that it's okay to trust your gut. Like, it's okay to be unsure, and it's okay to have unknown unknowns, but ultimately, like, you're going to have gut feels on most of your major decisions in your life.
And speaking about trusting your gut, you mentioned a sort of compulsory gap year or voluntary gap year. How do you feel about the traditional tertiary education system? I feel like obviously for a lot of kids who are self-funding or borrowing money to go and study at university, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, that university degree may have held more water or may have been a more valuable tool to getting yourself into a successful career path. Today, probably not so much. Do you have any thoughts on traditional tertiary education?
Yeah, I mean, I think most kids, like you said earlier, come out of school confused about what their future holds. And I think that if there's any uncertainty, I think that you should take a gap year. I think you should go and shadow for someone or offer to be a free intern where you can. I mean, a perfect example was my niece a few years ago. She didn't know what she wanted to study. She came and she interned for me, and I treated her just like any other person. I didn't treat her with kid gloves because we were related. And she had to fetch my coffee. She had to book my flights. If she booked the wrong flight, then I'd say, you messed that up. And then like we'd deal with it in like what a real adult situation would be if someone made a mistake in a corporate environment. And that was great because it almost steered her in terms of the fact that she could then see there were elements within our job that she liked, there were elements she didn't like, and then she actually ended up doing a BSc in comms because it gave her some supplementary elements that she couldn't take out of our environment. So I would suggest, if you can, I know like it's the most privileged answer because a lot of kids are struggling. For a lot of kids, they're reliant on grants or they can't necessarily go to university. So I think that there's a whole host of pressure, but the pressure comes because we, like you say, we think that tertiary is the be all and end all when there's a lot of ways to self-teach. There's a lot of ways to use digital methods to really unlock your own capabilities. And like with most employers like myself, we're not obsessed with your paperwork. We're obsessed with what you can do. And so much of that work is learned on the job and from practical executions. I'd much rather hire someone who's demonstrated value practically than someone who has a degree in something.
Yeah, and I think that's a global mindset that's starting to shift. You know, we're moving away from the sort of MBA hires to those that have more experience, that are displaying high levels of creativity and resourcefulness. These are skills that are probably more valuable than a traditional, tertiary education. So something that I also wanted to ask you about is you wrote a book, and I believe that you might be in the process of writing another book. If that's something that you're willing to talk about or share with us, I'd love to know how that first book came about and what's in store for the next one.
So for me, I like to see myself as a challenger brand, as a person, and I like to work with challenger brands. Like that's the thing that gravitates towards me. And when I started out in 2010, I don't know what I was doing, man. I rolled around in t-shirts, jeans, and flip-flops, wanted to be a hero. And, you like a lot of it's ego-driven, and you don't know what you're doing. You don't understand where you fit in like the hierarchy of an industry structure. So there were times when I was probably a bit brash, but I've always enjoyed speaking. So I used to convince conference organizers to just let me speak. And I had a whole bunch of different thoughts. And sometimes it was controversial, not for the sake of controversy, but just because I wanted to challenge the status quo. And I felt that a lot of big agencies were using jargon and using tech words and phrases to hoodwink clients, and they weren't acting in their best interests. And that was the one thing with Retroviral is like, I fortunately had a degree in comms. So like I had a strong traditional comms grounding, but I also could talk the talk. I mean, I built my own blogs on Joomla. I'd played around with some like high level coding. I understood what the sort of cost range of things was in the digital space, and then you've seen stories where, departments of education would charge 140 bar for a website,
Sure.
and all these other ridiculous tenders that have gone awry. But I wanted to be that person that looked out for brands. Like I wanted brands to be protected because it's not their job to know stuff around like domain elements and basic tech stuff. So that was kind of how it was positioned when I went live. And then all my conversations at a lot of conferences and things was around virality, and it was around like taking that traditional thinking of PR dissemination and bringing it into the digital world. And at the conferences where I spoke, like digital in South Africa was quite white male dominated. And for me, I just said to people, there are a lot of dicks in digital. Like I don't want to be the biggest dick, I want to be the best dick. And that's where that whole thing kind of evolved, and it moved away from digital. And the thinking was like, I don't want to be the biggest dick in business. I want to be best dick, because when you're the best, like people are going to love you. They're going to hate you. You're like Marmite, like I'm not going to please everybody. But ultimately, if you strive for the best and in your heart, you went to bed at night that you did your best, like people can't fault you on that. Like they can't fault you on the passion and the arrogance of it, But from all of those things, then I almost became quite interested in the marketing world, teaching people lessons around entrepreneurship. So it was things about hiring people, their cash flow struggles, like how you incorporate like an HR thinking. So a lot of my advice and my suggestions became around not just marketing, but actual like general business acumen and the things that I learned on my journey. And like that was kind of how my Twitter account grew. People were interested in the stuff that I was saying, or my like seeing through my lens around entrepreneurship and VCs and the fragmented world of capital raising in South Africa. So like I've been exposed to so many of these different aspects that I felt like I just had some words that I needed to get out. I've always loved writing, always loved blogging in those early days, loved tweeting. So for me, that's where I get a lot of my inspiration from. It's also like it's like going to the gym and working out and doing bench presses and arm curls and that kind of thing. Like with writing, the more you write in your personal experience, the better you are for your clients. So I encourage a lot of my own staff that have some form of like writing side hustle, whether it's a blog or something for a magazine or a newspaper. But the more you do that and the more subjects that you follow that you're passionate about, the more value that can bring into your own client ecosystem. So then, I had a publisher approach me and she said, I'd love seeing you speak and I'd love you to write a book. And I said, what do you want to write? What do you want me to write about? And she said, I want you to write about strategy. And I was like, God, that's so boring. And then I sat down in December 2016 and just started thinking about those themes, like the comedy that I'd been exposed to, stuff that I'd gone through, hiring first employees, networking, connecting the dots, marketing, all these kinds of things. And that's kind of where I just went on this mission and wrote that book. And fortunately, it did pretty well. And Rich Mulholland said to me, writing a book is the best business card you could ever do or ever have. And it has. It's generated more business, more interest, generated a lot of PR and a lot of interviews. And, you talk about eating your own dog food, where if you are in PR and marketing and word of mouth dissemination, like you should be doing those things to promote yourself. So, that's kind of how I roll. And then this latest book that I'm working on now is called Brandanalism. And Brandanalism was a concept that was started by a bunch of artists where they started vandalizing traditional outdoor billboards when there was anything that was like overly false or photoshopped, teaching young girls about how they have to have body perfect imagery. And they would say, like, they'd scratch that stuff out and just say, you're beautiful as you. They would vandalize bus stops and tell positive messages. So there's like positivity in like an act of vandalism, which I think is quite cool. And then at the start of this year, feels like an eternity ago, but there were those bushfires in Oz, and a lot of artists were vandalizing bus stops, putting pictures of like Blinky Bill running away from the fires and telling climate change messaging because the Prime Minister was an anti-climate changeist. So it's interesting because Brandanalism lives in all these different touch points, but we don't necessarily know what its name is. And I've done a bit of research. I've looked at opportunities that have arisen because of COVID. But the average S&P 500 company now is only 18 years old, where 20, 30 years ago, they were in their 50s or 60s. So the lifespan of businesses is a lot shorter. They rise and fall a lot quicker. And for me, I honestly believe that you have to continue to break and remake your brand, and you have to evolve as the world evolves. So you have to brandalize your own business, your own brand, your own thinking in order to, like we do with felt fires, you burn the old grass so that those green shoots can come through. And that for me is like an important aspect of Brandanalism, and that's what I'm excited to write about when I eventually get around to finishing it. But hopefully it'll be in stores as early as Q1 next year.
Great. Well, I look forward to that. And, it's really refreshing speaking to both an entrepreneur and an author that both, walks the talk and, shows levels of having skin in the game. And, speaking about your humble beginnings to where you are now, it's been a really inspiring and great conversation. So thank you for that. And for those that are listening and want to find out more about you, find out more about what you're doing, get in touch with you, and any of the projects that you have coming up, maybe just give us a little bit of information there.
Cool. I'm the most easily Googleable person in the world, Mike Sharman. I'm Mike Sharman on Twitter, Facebook, Insta, pretty much everywhere, LinkedIn. And then all my stuff, Retroviral, MatchKit, Retroactive, it's all easily linked through the wonderful beast that is the Google machine.
The Future Minds podcast is brought to you by Smartec. Smartec is an award-winning, intelligent, online mathematics and coding program for kids aged 4 to 14. Powered by sophisticated, adaptive AI, SmartTech teaches kids math and coding from the comfort of home in as little as 15 minutes per day. For more information, visit smarttech.com or download the app on tablet or iPad today.